Picture this: a vast, gleaming chamber deep in the heart of the galaxy, where the most powerful beings in the universe gather in hushed terror. The Galactic Council, rulers of 1,000 star systems, now sit frozen as holographic reports flicker before them, each one more horrifying than the last. An entire armada of warships that had conquered planets, crushed rebellions, and imposed their will across the cosmos, reduced to smoldering debris by a single human vessel. The air hums with panic, the weight of their mistake pressing down like a collapsing star. The High Chancellor rises, their voice trembling with a revelation that will echo through history. We must never fight them again. Humans are not what we thought. This isn't just a battle, it's a reckoning. For centuries, the alien empire saw humanity as primitive, fragile, nothing more than ants scurrying beneath their boots. They came expecting submission, but what they found was something far more terrifying. A species that doesn't know when to quit. A species that turns desperation into defiance, that sees impossible odds and laughs. The Council's fear isn't just about losing ships or territory. It's about facing the truth that they've awakened something they can't control. And now, with their fleets in ruins, they're scrambling to undo a war they never should have started. But how did we get here? What twisted the galaxy's mightiest empire into banning conflict with a race they once dismissed as insignificant? The answer lies in the shadows of battlefields strewn with alien wreckage, in the whispered warnings of soldiers who barely escaped, in the cold, hard data that proves humanity fights like nothing else in the cosmos. This is the story of why the alien empire declared humans off limits not out of mercy, but out of sheer, unshakable terror. Strap in, because what comes next isn't just a tale of war. It's a lesson in what happens when you underestimate us. It all began with a misunderstanding, one of those cruel twists of fate where curiosity collided with paranoia, and the galaxy would never be the same. The alien empire's first diplomatic envoy descended toward Earth, a sleek vessel of polished obsidian and shimmering light, a gesture of peace, or so they claimed. But humanity, ever inquisitive, met them not with weapons, but with probes, scanners, and buzzing satellites eager to study the unknown. When one malfunctioning drone drifted too close, its erratic signals triggered the envoy's defense systems. In a flash of plasma fire, the alien ship vaporized it, only for its own overzealous safeguards to misfire, igniting a chain reaction that tore the envoy apart from within. To the Empire's high command, it wasn't an accident, it was an ambush. Their warlords erupted in outrage, visions of human treachery fueling their fury. How dare these backward creatures strike first? How dare they hide their claws behind clumsy machines? The Council's hawks seized the moment, demanding immediate retaliation. No one stopped to consider that humanity hadn't even recognized the envoy as a peace offering, that to them, it was just another puzzle floating in the void, begging to be understood. The Empire's response was swift, brutal, and utterly misguided. A punitive fleet scorched the outer colonies, a warning shot meant to terrify humanity into submission. But humans don't kneel, they adapt. While the aliens celebrated their victory, Earth scientists were already picking apart the wreckage of that first encounter, studying every scrap of alien alloy, every scorched circuit. By the time the Empire realized their mistake, humanity had turned those lessons into weapons, not out of malice, but necessity. The war that followed wasn't fought on terms the Empire recognized. No grand battles, no honor-bound duels between fleets, just relentless, unpredictable strikes from creatures who refused to play by the rules of civilized warfare. The aliens had expected fear. What they got was ingenuity, wrapped in a grim, grinning defiance they still don't know how to counter. The alien fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Earth with the cold precision of a surgeon's blade, their ships gleaming like obsidian monoliths against the void. To them, this wasn't a war, it was a mop-up operation. Their scouts had mapped human defenses, their tacticians had simulated every possible counterattack, and their engineers had assured them human weaponry was centuries behind. The High Admiral herself lounged on the command deck, sipping a crystalline drink laced with euphorics, already composing the victory missive to the Council. "Burn their orbital stations," she ordered, "and let the wreckage remind them what happens when insects challenge gods," but the gods had miscalculated. The first volleys of plasma fire streaked toward human satellites, only for half the shots to fizzle against suddenly shimmering energy shields that hadn't existed in any of the Empire's scans. The rest were swatted from the sky by pinpoint railgun bursts, their trajectories adjusted in real time by algorithms learning faster than the aliens could recalibrate. Panic crackled through the fleet's comms as human vessels, once dismissed as sluggish and crude, pivoted with eerie synchronization, their hulls morphing mid-maneuver to bleed off heat from alien targeting systems. What in the void are they? A gunner shrieked as his console flashed warnings human missiles were rewriting their own guidance paths mid-flight, slipping through electronic countermeasures like smoke through fingers. Then came the drones. Swarming from hidden launch bays, they moved not as individual units but as a single, adaptive organism. One cluster feinted left, drawing alien point defense fire, while another dove beneath their formation, latching onto engine nacelles and flooding them with nano-disassemblers scavenged from the Empire's own wrecked probes. The High Admiral's drink slipped from her fingers, shattering as a human cruiser, its armor now reflecting alien shield harmonics, rammed through her flagship's flank without firing a shot. "Their weapons evolve faster than we can analyze," her science officer screamed before the feed cut to static. By the time the survivors limped home, their shattered pride outnumbered only by their dead, the Empire finally grasped the horrifying truth: humanity didn't just fight. They learned, and worse, they improved. Every skirmish, every scrap of debris left behind, every stolen line of code was fuel for an evolutionary fire they couldn't put out. The Council's debates that night weren't about retaliation, they were about survival, because if humans could turn a single battle into a leap forward, what would a war make them? The seed of doubt had been planted, and in the sterile halls of alien power, it grew like a weed through cracks in their certainty. The Vega Prime Nebula was supposed to be a graveyard, a swirling, ionized death trap where no sane commander would dare engage. That's exactly why the humans chose it. When the alien armada pursued what they thought was a crippled human battleship into the nebula's crimson haze, their scanners lit up with panic. Sensors meant to track 1,000 targets at once flickered like dying stars, drowned in the nebula's electromagnetic scream, thermal readings blurred. Comms dissolved into static. The admiral in charge, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, gripped her command throne as the first reports trickled in shapes moving in the gloom, too fast to be ships, too jagged to be natural. Then the mines detonated, not the crude explosives the Empire expected, but swarms of self-replicating drones, camouflaged as debris, burrowing into hull seams before detonating in synchronized chains. Alien vessels shuddered, their shields useless against attacks they couldn't even see coming. Frigates spiraled into each other, their navigational systems blinded by the nebula's interference, while human fighters outfitted with stripped-down, analog targeting systems darted between them like wolves through tall grass. The Admiral's flagship took the worst of it. A boarding pod, disguised as a piece of shrapnel, slammed into her hangar bay. By the time her guards realized the humans inside weren't wearing standard armor, just pressurized exoskeletons wired with jury-rigged alien tech. The ship's reactor was already priming to overload. She barely escaped, her shuttle streaking through the carnage as the nebula itself seemed to twist around her, the humans using its chaos like a weapon. Her final transmission, choked with static and something darker dread, reached the Empire's remaining fleets just before her ship vanished from scopes. They don't fight fair, they don't fight by rules. Retreat now, or they'll drag you into the dark where they thrive. Back on the Council's command deck, the silence was heavier than the nebula's storms. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a revelation. Humans didn't just adapt to their environment, they weaponized it. They turned the Empire's own technology against them, turned space itself into an ally. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's warlords hesitated, not because they feared death, but because they feared something far worse, that after Vega Prime, their soldiers would stop believing they could win. The interrogation chamber was sterile, cold, a place designed to break beings far stronger than what the aliens believed humans to be. The soldier sat slumped in the chair, uniform torn, blood smeared across his cheek where the guards had gotten impatient. Yet when the interrogator activated the neural scanner, expecting whimpers or pleas, the human grinned. "That thing work on fear?" he asked, tilting his head. "Shame, I was hoping for something more creative." Silence stretched as the alien adjusted the settings, increasing the pain receptor's sensitivity. The soldier's body tensed, muscles locking, but his grin never wavered. "You folks keep making the same mistake," he gasped between waves of agony. "You think war is our profession." A laugh, ragged but bright, ripped from his throat. "We do this for fun." The interrogator froze. The scanners confirmed the human wasn't lying. Worse, his vitals showed excitement. That report circulated through high command like a virus, whispers growing louder with every dismissive scoff it silenced. Admirals who had laughed off human tricks now studied the footage in quiet horror. Counselors who had voted for total war found themselves staring at casualty projections with fresh dread. Because if humans didn't fight out of necessity, but for the sheer, reckless joy of it, what did that mean for an empire built on discipline and order? The interrogator's final note, buried in the file but never forgotten, was simplest of all. They don't just endure pain, they revel in it. Our weapons don't scare them. They challenge them. Some truths are too dangerous to ignore. And as that report passed from hand to hand, a new kind of fear took root, not of human weapons, but of the minds behind them. Because an enemy who fights for survival can be predicted, an enemy who fights for the thrill, that's a storm even gods can't control. The siege of Saul wasn't supposed to happen like this. The Empire's generals had envisioned a swift, surgical strike. Earth's defenses shattered, its cities reduced to smoldering craters, humanity kneeling before the might of superior firepower. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare of their own making. Their orbital cannons rained destruction down on sprawling metropolises, only for the smoke to clear and reveal scaffolds rising faster than the rubble could settle. Underground factories, hidden beneath mountains and oceans, churned out replacement parts faster than the aliens could track them. A high-ranking general, watching from his command ship, gripped the railing as live feeds showed human engineers welding broken skyscrapers back together under artillery fire. "They thrive in chaos," he muttered, the words dripping with something between awe and dread. This wasn't war as the Empire understood it. Their doctrines demanded order, predictability, territories captured, supply lines secured, enemies broken by sheer logistical superiority. But humans, they treated destruction like a fresh canvas. Every crater became a foundation. Every blackout birthed a dozen jury-rigged power grids. Even their civilians, those the Empire had dismissed as helpless non-combatants moved with eerie coordination, transforming ruin into reinvention before the invaders could regroup. One alien scout, surveying the ruins of a city they'd bombed 3 times, reported seeing children stacking debris into barricades laughing as they worked. Casualties mounted, not just in ships and soldiers, but in morale. The Empire's troops, raised on tales of inevitable victory, now faltered at the sight of human flags fluttering atop half-collapsed buildings. Their commanders' orders grew hesitant, their strategies increasingly reactive. What was the point of glassing a continent if the survivors would have it rebuilt within weeks? Why waste munitions on infrastructure humans treated as disposable? Back on the Council's orbital sanctum, debates raged in hushed, frantic tones. Hardliners demanded escalation planet crackers, bioweapons, anything to force surrender. But the pragmatists, those who'd seen the reports from Vega Prime and the Nebula, leaned over the holodeble with grim resignation. "You can't break what refuses to stay broken," one counselor hissed. "Every blow we land just teaches them how to hit back harder." The withdrawal order, when it came, wasn't signed in triumph or even relief. It was scribbled in shaking hands, the ink smudged with sweat. The Empire had thrown its full might at humanity's cradle, and all it had earned was a single, unshakable truth. Where others saw endings, humans saw opportunity. And that made them the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. The strategy was madness. That's what the alien logistics corps thought when the first reports came in: human colonies burning themselves to the ground. Not from orbital bombardment, not from imperial siege weapons, but by their own hands. Fuel depots detonated in synchronized blasts, food silos set ablaze with methodical precision. Even water purification plants rigged with makeshift explosives, their own engineers standing grim-faced at the detonators. The Empire's advanced scouts watched in stunned silence as thriving settlements transformed into smoldering ruins, leaving nothing but ashes and a single, haunting message scrawled across the wreckage in human script: "Try eating dust." For the first time in galactic warfare, the invaders faced an enemy who played by no rules at all. Human commanders weren't just willing to sacrifice territory, they celebrated it. "Let them march into hell," one grizzled colonel broadcasted over open channels, laughter crackling through the static. "We'll be waiting on the other side." The Empire's supply officers, trained for orderly occupations and resource seizures, recoiled at the chaos. Their projections had accounted for stolen warehouses, repurposed factories, even guerrilla raids. But this was systematic annihilation. A senior logistics commander, his tentacle-like limbs trembling over the holographic reports, finally collapsed into his chair. "They'd rather burn everything than lose," he whispered, the words dripping with horrified realization. His calculations were in ruins. Without captured fuel, his crawler divisions stalled in the wastelands. Without food caches, his troops resorted to rationing algae paste meant for emergencies. The Empire's war machine, a juggernaut that had fed on conquered worlds for centuries, now choked on the ashes of human defiance. And the worst part, it worked. Without supply lines, the Imperial advance faltered. Frontline units, accustomed to living off the land, found themselves stranded in radioactive deserts or frozen tundras stripped bare. Morale plummeted as soldiers starved beside the charred skeletons of what should have been their salvation. Back at high command, strategists scrambled to adjust, but how do you plan for an enemy who treats their own homes as disposable? One junior officer, fresh from the academy, dared to voice the unthinkable. What if they're not just denying us resources? What if they're training us to expect nothing? The implications were worse than any battlefield defeat. Every scorched outpost, Every self-destructed factory was a lesson, one the Empire was learning too late. Humanity wasn't just fighting for survival, they were rewriting the rules of war itself, proving that victory isn't about holding ground, but about how much you're willing to let go. And as the alien war machine sputtered to a halt, a new, terrifying question spread through their ranks. If humans would do this to their own, what would they do to us? The first cracks appeared in the outer rim colonies, subtle at first, whispers among the slave castes hauling ore under the Empire's whips. Then the sabotage began. Machinery malfunctioned at critical moments. Supply drones veered off course into deep space. Armories reported missing weapons with no signs of forced entry. The Empire's overseers dismissed it as incompetence, tightening punishments, doubling quotas, until the day 100 vassal ships, supposedly stripped of their hyperdrives centuries ago, vanished from a mining fleet, only to reappear weeks later, bristling with jury-rigged plasma cannons, broadcasting human combat footage spliced with their own ancient war chants. The High Chancellor's throne room erupted in chaos. "This is your doing," a warlord snarled, slamming a clawed fist onto the holographic display, showing a dozen uprisings flaring across star systems. Your humans seeded this poison, but the truth was worse. Humanity hadn't orchestrated the revolts, they'd simply inspired them. For the first time in living memory, the Empire's subjects saw a glimmer of something unthinkable: hope. Footage of human guerrillas outwitting Imperial battalions spread through the undercities like wildfire. Songs about Earth's defiance echoed in the galley pits. Even the Empire's propaganda backfired. When they broadcast images of human cities burning to demoralize the masses, the vassal species saw not defeat, but resilience, how each bombardment seemed to birth fiercer resistance. Then came the broadcasts, crude, patchwork transmissions from rebel holdouts mimicking human tactics. A reptilian labor caste, once thought too docile to lift a tool without permission, ambushed an Imperial garrison using mining explosives. A fungal hive mind, previously dismissed as incapable of coordinated thought, rerouted an entire planetary defense grid by splicing their neural tendrils into the control systems. Each victory, no matter how small, was a spark in the tinderbox of Imperial oppression. The High Chancellor's advisors begged for a crackdown, but the cost was already spiraling out of control. Every warship sent to quell a rebellion was one fewer holding the line against humanity. Every resource spent putting down revolts meant less fuel for the front lines. Even the Imperial Guard, the most loyal of the loyal, began hesitating. Why die for an empire that couldn't protect its own backyard? The breaking point came when the Chancellor's own vassal translator, a meek avian scholar who'd served dutifully for decades, refused to relay an execution order. "The humans taught us something," she said softly, removing her obedience collar and letting it clatter to the floor. "Fear only works if you have something left to lose." That night, as the Council debated scorched Earth reprisals, the High Chancellor stared at the holographic star map, half its systems now flickering crimson with unrest. Not from human fleets, not from superweapons, but from the quiet, unstoppable realization sweeping through the Empire's veins. If hairless apes from a backwater world could defy the unthinkable, why couldn't they? The war wasn't just being lost on battlefields anymore. It was being lost in the hearts of those who'd been told, for generations, that resistance was impossible. And that was a defeat no amount of firepower could undo. The holographic arena flickered to life atop the Imperial flagship's deck, its shimmering boundaries humming with containment fields. General Krasther, the undying, conqueror of 12 systems, stood at the center, his obsidian armor etched with the scars of 100 duels. The humans had been harassing his fleet for weeks, hit-and-run strikes, ambushes in asteroid belts, never a straight fight. When his comms crackled with a lone human voice offering single combat to decide the sector's fate, he'd laughed until his ribs ached. Finally, a chance to crush these vermin in front of his warriors, to remind the galaxy what real honor looked like. The human who stepped into the ring wore no armor, just a tattered flight suit and a grin that made Krasthur's hackles rise. "Rules?" the human asked, rolling his shoulders. The general sneered. "To the death, obviously." The human's grin widened. "Yeah, figured. I meant your rules." What followed wasn't a duel, it was dissection. Krasthur lunged first, his plasma glaive capable of slicing through battle tank armor. The human sidestepped, not with a warrior's grace, but with the lazy efficiency of someone swatting a fly. Every swing, every feint, the general had trained for decades to perfect. The human countered them like he'd read the playbook. When Krasthur triggered his hidden wrist blade, the human didn't even flinch, he just pivoted, using the general's momentum to send him crashing into the arena's edge. The impact rattled Krasthur's teeth, his warriors' cheers died in their throats, then the human started talking. "See, you keep fighting like this is about skill," he said, dodging another furious strike. "But war's not a dance." He ducked, swept Krasthur's legs, and jammed a thumb into the nerve cluster beneath his armor's armpit seam. The general howled as his arm went numb. "It's about winning." The final blow wasn't from a blade or gun. As Krasthur staggered, the human yanked a loose cable from the arena's projector array and whipped it around the general's throat. The containment field flickered just for a second as the human slammed him through it, sending them both tumbling into the ship's real gravity. Krasthur hit the deck hard, the cable still tightening. His last sight wasn't the human's face, but the horrified stares of his own elite guard, their weapons useless in a duel they couldn't comprehend. Demons. Krasthur choked out, his vision darkening. "You fight like demons." The human let go, watching the body slump. "Nah," he said to the silent hall, "we just fight to live." Word spread faster than the Empire could contain it. The Undying, their greatest living warrior, slain not by superior strength or technology, but by a scrawny human who treated combat like a game of chess played with live grenades. Entire divisions, raised on tales of honorable single combat as the pinnacle of warfare, now hesitated. If their traditions were so easily shattered, what else had they been wrong about? The Empire's cultural bedrock, the unshakable belief in their martial superiority, crumbled overnight, and in its place, a single, whispering doubt. If humans could turn their greatest strength into a weakness, what couldn't they do? The lab should have been the Empire's crowning achievement, a sterile, gleaming fortress where the finest xenogeneticists crafted weapons to humble entire species. That morning, they'd injected a human test subject with strain 747, a viral scourge designed to liquefy neural tissue in minutes. The scientists watched through reinforced glass, instruments humming, as the pathogen took hold. The subject convulsed, veins blackening under their skin, and then, impossibly, stabilized. By the third hour, the blackened veins faded to pink. By the fifth, the subject was sitting up, cracking jokes through the observation mic. One technician, her antennae twitching in disbelief, reran the scans. "This can't be right," she whispered. The virus wasn't just being neutralized, it was being repurposed. Human white blood cells were stitching the pathogen's RNA into their own DNA like engineers salvaging spare parts. They're not just resisting it, she realized, voice rising in horror. They're learning from it. The lab director ordered immediate containment, but it was too late. Subject after subject showed the same terrifying adaptability. Strain after strain, engineered over decades to target human biology, crumbled like wet paper. A bioweapon meant to induce paralysis. Humans synthesized a counteragent in their sweat glands. A prion designed to eat brain tissue. Their livers mutated to digest it like protein. The final straw came when a panicked assistant dumped a dozen different pathogens into one subject's chamber, only for the human to emerge stronger, their immune system now bristling with hybrid antibodies. That's when the screaming started. A senior virologist, his carapace flushed with stress pheromones, slammed his claws into the console. We spent centuries perfecting these. He roared, across the galaxy, imperial biowarfare stockpiles, once the ultimate deterrent, were now worthless. Worse, every failed test gave humanity's researchers new data to turn against their creators. The Empire's greatest fear wasn't just that humans could survive their deadliest plagues, it was that every attack made them harder to kill. By dawn, the order came down: all bioweapons research was to cease immediately. Not out of mercy, but sheer tactical dread, because an enemy that evolves faster than your weapons can be designed, that's not a foe you can defeat, that's a force of nature. And the Empire had just learned the hard way: you don't wage war against the tide. The Empire's propaganda division had spent months crafting the perfect horror reel footage of their planet cracker fleets glassing human colonies, slow-motion captures of human ships torn apart by plasma fire, even doctored audio of screaming civilians begging for mercy. They beamed it across every human frequency, expecting panic, despair, the crumbling of morale. What they got instead was the sound of laughter. Within hours of the first broadcast, human networks exploded, not with terror, but with memes. The Empire's grim footage of a battleship exploding was looped and set to jaunty music, captioned, "When you forget to mute your mic in a meeting." Their ominous shot of troop carriers descending became a viral challenge. Try not to blink as the almond-shaped depression pods arrive. Impossible. Even the spliced screams were remixed into bass, heavy dance tracks, blaring from resistance-held cities like a middle finger carved into sound waves. The alien communications officer monitoring the backlash dropped his datapad, antennae twitching in disbelief. "They're mocking it," he whispered. His superior, a grizzled veteran of a dozen psychological campaigns, stared at the screens where human forums dissected imperial propaganda like bad movie trailers. "Worse," she muttered, "they're enjoying it. This wasn't just resilience, it was something far more dangerous. Humans had turned terror into content, weaponized humor like a shield against despair." Every shared joke, every satirical edit, was a collective shrug in the face of annihilation. The Empire's carefully cultivated image of inevitability shattered against a simple truth: you can't intimidate a species that treats apocalypse footage as meme fodder. The final blow came when Resistance hackers hijacked an Imperial broadcast mid-transmission, replacing a doom-laden speech from the High Chancellor with a crudely animated dancing alien overlord, its movements synced to an old Earth disco hit. By dawn, the animation was spray-painted across half the occupied systems, graffitied onto Imperial barracks by laughing dissidents. The propaganda division's next meeting was ominously quiet. Their most seasoned analyst finally broke the silence, rubbing his temples. "We spent centuries perfecting fear, they counter it with punchlines." And that was the moment the Empire realized their mistake. Psychological warfare relies on one unshakable rule: the target must care about the horror you're selling. But humanity, they'd turned the cosmos' most advanced intimidation tactics into a cosmic roast session. When your enemy laughs in the face of extinction, you're not fighting soldiers anymore. You're fighting the irresistible, indefatigable spirit of a species that refuses to take anything seriously, even the end of the world. The Imperial Treasury had survived 1,000 crises hyperinflation in the Zeta colonies. the great drone uprisings, reconstruction costs, even the theft of an entire fleet's payroll by rogue AI, but nothing prepared them for the economic hemorrhage of fighting humans. Auditor General Vexthro watched the latest projections flicker across his holodisplay, his chitinous fingers trembling. "Every missile we fire costs more than a human city," he muttered to his aides, "and they recycle our wreckage into new weapons before our accountants finish the damage reports." It wasn't supposed to be this way. The Empire's war planners had calculated occupation costs down to the last credit human infrastructure seized, their industries repurposed, their labor enslaved. Instead, they found themselves pouring resources into a bottomless pit. Human resistance cells didn't just sabotage imperial supply depots, they auctioned stolen goods back to the Empire's own corrupt governors through black markets so vast they had loyalty programs. A battalion commander on the front lines reported his troops buying back their confiscated rations from human smugglers at a 400% markup. "It's not war," growled a quartermaster whose warehouses kept mysteriously emptying. "It's a flea market with orbital strikes." Meanwhile, the Empire's vassal worlds groaned under the strain. Taxes tripled, food rationing hit even the elite castes, the once unshakable imperial credit plummeted in value, surpassed in underground trading by human-made script printed on salvaged drone hulls. When the Treasury attempted to seize a human-occupied asteroid belt rumored to hold rare metals, they discovered the asteroids were hollowed-out shells. The humans had strip-mined them years prior, using the materials to build decoy bases that lured imperial excavators into pointless sieges. The breaking point came when Treasurer General Yilthok, a staunch war hawk, stormed into the High Council's chamber clutching a slate like a live grenade. "We're being played," he hissed, flinging financial charts onto the holographic table. The numbers pulsed crimson, entire sectors' GDPs vaporized by occupation costs, trade routes strangled by privateers flying human-made false flags, even imperial armories reporting ghost expenditures for weapons that never reached the front. "We've spent 800 years building an economy that could endure anything," Yilthok snarled. "Humans tore it down in 8 months, not with bombs." With accounting, murmurs of dissent spread through the council like cracks in a dam. Merchant princes who'd funded the war now demanded withdrawals. Planetary governors whispered of secession rather than face another round of austerity. Even the military's paymasters, traditionally silent, began questioning orders. Why deploy another fleet when soldiers hadn't been paid in cycles? The Empire's greatest strength, its monolithic unity, now trembled under the weight of a simple truth: you can't rule a galaxy when your subjects are starving. And humans, they thrived in scarcity like rats in rubble, turning deprivation into an art form. By the time the first riots erupted on the imperial homeworld, citizens chanting human slogans, no less, the council's debates turned frantic. Not about victory, but survival, because the Empire had waged war on humanity's armies, their ships, their planets. Yet the fatal blow came from somewhere far more vulnerable: their balance sheets. And as credit ratings collapsed and rebellions bloomed like supernovas, the High Chancellor finally uttered the unthinkable: cease all military operations. Not because they'd lost the will to fight, but because they'd run out of money to lose. The medbay smelled of antiseptic and ozone, the sterile glow of the Empire's healing pods casting long shadows across the floor. Inside one of them, a human soldier lay motionless, his vitals flickering weakly on the display. The alien medic, a seasoned veteran of 100 battlefield extractions, adjusted the neural suppressors one final time. "This one won't give you trouble," he assured the guards. "The scans show 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and enough tranquilizers in his bloodstream to drop a Tharxian bull. The guards relaxed, their weapon arms lowering. Big mistake. It started with a twitch so slight, the medic almost missed it. Then the human's eyes snapped open, clear and focused, no trace of the drugged haze that should have had him comatose. By the time the medic realized the vitals had been faked, likely by some unholy combination of controlled breathing and whatever unhackable nonsense humans did with their own biology, the soldier was already moving. The Roman 4 line became a garrote, the dislocated shoulder, a feint, popped back into place mid-swing. The tranquilizers, later, the surviving guard would swear the human had smiled as he fought, like the drugs were nothing more than a mild buzz. The aftermath was worse than the escape, because the medic, trembling as he gave his report, didn't just describe a wounded prisoner overpowering trained guards. He described something far more unsettling, a predator playing dead. They don't have a pain threshold, he whispered to his superiors, claws clacking against the datapad. Or if they do, they ignore it. The guards had followed protocol perfectly, restraints, suppressors, constant monitoring, none of it mattered. Humans, it seemed, treated injury like a tactical option. Word spread like radiation sickness. Field medics began double-checking unconscious humans with live voltage. Evac teams hesitated before loading human POWs onto transports, paranoid that even the ones missing limbs were waiting for the right moment to strike. A veteran field surgeon, her carapace still splattered with the blood of a human who'd torn out his own stitches to use the scalpel on her assistant, summed it up best: their wounded don't surrender. They reload. The Empire had studied human warfare for decades, dissected their tactics, even grudgingly admired their resilience, but this was something darker. A species that weaponized weakness, that turned helplessness into a trap. Soldiers began eyeing human casualties with the same wary tension as active combatants. Commanders quietly updated engagement protocols. No prisoners unless sedated and disemboweled. Even that didn't feel like enough, because in the dead of night, in the flickering glow of emergency lights, every alien in the medbay started seeing it. The way a human's fingers might twitch when you turned your back, the way their breath synced a little too perfectly with the monitor's beeps. Waiting, always waiting, the Empire had feared human warriors. Now they learned a harder truth. The real monsters were the ones who let you think you'd already won. The forest was supposed to be dead. That's what the Imperial sweep teams reported after the ambush. No life signs, no heat signatures, just the smoldering wreckage of a human patrol and the lingering stench of plasma-scorched earth. They'd left the bodies where they fell, standard procedure when dealing with vermin. Big mistake. 6 months later, a supply convoy vanished without a trace on the Keswick run. No distress calls, no debris, just 30 metric tons of munitions and a dozen seasoned troopers gone like smoke in the wind. The search drones found something worse than wreckage, footprints leading away from the site, human-sized, pressed into the mud beside a crudely carved message on a fallen tree trunk: "Miss me." From that moment, the legend took root. Scouts whispered about shadowed figures moving through the tree line at dusk. Patrols reported sniper fire from impossible angles, their attackers vanishing before thermal scopes could lock on. The Empire's field commanders dismissed it as paranoia until the dam blew. The Varathian hydro complex was supposed to be untouchable, its defenses calibrated to detect anything larger than a rodent. Yet somehow, 400,000 tons of durasteel and concrete collapsed inward at exactly 0300, drowning an entire armored division in the resulting flood. The sole survivor, a drone operator who'd been scanning the perimeter, swore his monitors flickered just before the explosion. A blur of movement near the primary support column, gone too fast for the cameras to catch. But the audio feed picked up something his superiors couldn't explain, a voice humming an off-key human drinking song moments before detonation. Troops started calling him the Ghost of Keswick. Officers insisted it was psychological warfare, until the day a scout team found their missing lieutenant's body propped against a tree, his armor stripped away, his chest carved with coordinates leading to a hidden cache of stolen Imperial rations. The knife still lodged between his ribs wasn't standard issue. It was a field-forged shiv, its handle wrapped in scavenged human uniform cloth. Fear spread faster than orders could contain it. Sentries fired at shadows. Drone operators mistook wildlife for saboteurs, wasting precious ammunition on empty trees. The Empire's greatest tactical advantage, their unshakable discipline, crumbled under the weight of a single, unrelenting truth. Somewhere out there in the ruins of their own conquest, a human they'd written off was rewriting the rules of war. And he wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. The final blow came when a high-ranking commander, inspecting the so-called secure forward base, woke to find his personal sidearm missing from its holster. In its place, a single bullet, polished to a mirror shine, resting atop a handwritten note in perfect Imperial script, counting the days until we meet. Stay sharp. That's when the Empire learned the hard way: you don't hunt humans on their own turf, you survive them, barely. The first signs came from the unlikeliest of places, neutral trading hubs, where merchants once scrambled to appease Imperial tax collectors, now openly wearing human-made resistance symbols. Diplomatic envoys from neutral systems, who for centuries bowed their heads in the High Chancellor's presence, began leaving their seats empty at Imperial summits. Even the Moon Trade Cartel, famed for their profit over principles motto, quietly diverted shipments of durasteel away from Imperial dry docks. The shift wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but like tectonic plates grinding beneath a continent, the galaxy's allegiance was sliding inexorably out of the Empire's grasp. Ambassador Vrel of the Jyxian Concord was the first to voice the unthinkable. Standing before the Council's shimmering holoprojector, his four hands clasped in a gesture of ancestral distress, he displayed star maps flickering with newly formed alliances, neutral systems sharing resources, opening borders to human refugees, even trading tactical data under the guise of cultural exchanges. "You're not just losing battles," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization that had survived 3 galactic wars by reading the winds. "You're losing the narrative." The Imperial hawks scoffed, of course. What did these pacifist beetles know of war? But the data didn't lie. Neutral worlds, once terrified of Imperial retaliation, now hosted human engineers repairing their infrastructure in exchange for safe harbor. Merchant guilds, long bullied into exclusive contracts, suddenly found alternative suppliers for military-grade components. Even the celestial archivists of Xantar, keepers of galactic history for millennia, began classifying Imperial edicts as historical curiosities rather than active law. The Empire's greatest weapon, the aura of inevitability, was cracking like old paint. Then came the Calaxis incident, a minor border system. Calaxis had been a loyal vassal for 800 years. When Imperial forces demanded their hydroponic farms to feed frontline troops, the Calaxians didn't refuse, they simply stalled, endless paperwork, malfunctioning harvesters. By the time the Empire realized, they'd been quietly shipping food to human-held territories instead. Half the sector's governors had adopted the same tactic. The punitive fleet sent to discipline Calaxis found their warp lanes mysteriously obstructed by asteroid drift, their supply convoys misrouted by suddenly glitchy nav computers. The message was clear: The Empire's subjects weren't just disobeying, they were coordinating. The galaxy is turning against us, Vrel warned in his final address, tendrils flushed with distress pigments. Not because they love humans, because they fear us less. And that was the cruelest twist of all. The Empire had spent centuries ruling through terror, believing no one would dare defy them. But humanity's defiance had exposed the truth. Fear only works if there's no alternative. Now, from the neon spires of corporate megastations to the methane slums of mining outposts, that alternative had a name, and it wasn't rebellion. It was indifference. The council chambers, once abuzz with war plans, now echoed with something far more dangerous: silence, the kind that settles when even the most arrogant conquerors finally face the math. Because you can crush a rebellion, you can glass a planet, but how do you fight an enemy you can't even see? An enemy made of whispers, of withheld resources, of 1,000 tiny acts of courage blossoming in your shadow. The answer, written in the stars but unspoken in that room, was simple. You don't, you fade, slowly, quietly, and one day, you wake up to find your throne surrounded by empty space, your decrees bouncing off the void where subjects used to kneel. The Empire's diplomats didn't need scanners to see it. The galaxy wasn't just choosing sides anymore, it was choosing aftermath. The doomsday weapon was meant to be the Empire's final answer, a planet-cracking leviathan capable of reducing entire solar systems to dust with a single discharge. Its activation sequence, protected by layers of quantum encryption, was supposedly unhackable, or so the engineers claimed, right up until the moment their masterwork's targeting array swiveled away from Earth and locked onto the Imperial fleet instead. Deep in the weapons control core, a senior technocrat clawed at his console in disbelief as alien glyphs flickered into human script before his eyes. They didn't brute force the encryption, he whispered, watching helplessly as the countdown timer accelerated on its own. They taught our AI to translate their jokes. The last thing he heard before the overload alarms drowned him out was laughter, human laughter, echoing through the comms in perfect sync with the weapon's charging cycle. Meanwhile, on the Imperial homeworld, the streets erupted not in celebration of imminent victory, but in chaos. Crowds gathered beneath the towering holographic displays, watching live feeds of their own superweapon turning against them. A mother clutching her hatchlings screamed as the screen showed the dreadnought's plasma coils glowing crimson, not the serene blue of Imperial control, but the violent hue of repurposed code. "You said this would end the war," she howled at a passing patrol, her voice raw with betrayal. The guards had no answer. Their helmets hid the same terror gnawing at their guts. If humanity could twist their ultimate weapon into a pet, what couldn't they do? The council's emergency session descended into bedlam. A junior minister, her scales flushed with defiance, slammed her data pad onto the table. "We spent 17 cycles worth of resources on that toy," she snarled, gesturing to the smoldering wreckage now streaking across the viewscreen. Across the chamber, an elder statesman who'd survived 3 succession wars slumped in his seat, muttering the words no one dared voice aloud. "We built a hammer to crush insects. Instead, we handed them the keys to our armory, but the true devastation wasn't in orbit. It was in the city squares where alien civilians, once proud, once unquestioning, now burned conscription notices in open defiance." A shopkeeper tossed his imperial medals into the pyre, shouting over the crackling flames, "My son died for this, for an empire too stupid to guard its own doomsday switch." The chant spread faster than the authorities could suppress it, rippling from world to world like a shockwave. Why fight what we can't beat? By dawn, the riots reached the capital's gates. Politicians who'd spent careers towing the party line now jostled for holocam time, denouncing the war with startling fervor. One, a decorated veteran missing 2 limbs from an early human skirmish, hurled his prosthetic onto the High Chancellor's podium. "You told us they were savages," he spat, his voice trembling with decades of bottled rage. "Turns out, the only savages here were us." And just like that, the Empire's greatest strength, the unshakable unity of its people, shattered. Not from enemy bombs or economic collapse, but from a single, inescapable truth blinking across every viewscreen in the cosmos. Humanity hadn't just outplayed them. They'd outthought them, and no amount of propaganda could spin that into anything but what it was: the beginning of the end. The Emperor's chambers were never silent, not truly. Even in the dead of night, the whisper of servo drones hummed through the walls. The faint pulse of distant starships vibrated through the palace foundations. The rhythmic breathing of 1,000 loyal guards echoed down the corridors. Yet for the first time in his reign, the Emperor heard none of it, only the echoes of his own nightmare, replaying behind his eyelids like a corrupted holo loop. Humans not in battle armor, not wielding stolen plasma rifles, just standing there, a sea of them, filling his throne room, his corridors, his very bedchamber, their voices a murmur that built to a roar. "Why did you start this?" No accusation, no rage, just that endless, grinding question, asked in 1,000 dialects, 1,000 tones, until it unraveled the seams of his certainty. He'd woken clawing at his own throat, his inner eyelids snapping shut against phantom stares. Across the palace, his council saw the change before he spoke a word. The way his triple-jointed fingers trembled around his scepter, the unnatural pause before he gave orders, as if weighing each word against some unseen scale. The Empire's ruler, who'd once incinerated rebellions with a flick of his wrist, now flinched at the scrape of a servant's chair. They said nothing, not until the war analysts arrived. The datapad's contents should have been impossible. 12,000 capital ships lost, 18 million troops unaccounted for, entire sectors slipping from imperial control not through rebellion, but quiet administrative entropy, taxes unpaid, decrees ignored, the machinery of empire rusting from disuse. The High Chancellor, a being who'd orchestrated the glassing of 7 species, let the device slip from his grasp. It clattered against the obsidian floor, the holographic numbers still spinning, net resource loss exceeding cumulative expenditures of the last 900 years. Extinction, he whispered, not of humanity, but of the idea that had fueled imperial conquest for eons, that strength was eternal, that dominance was destiny. Around the table, ministers who'd spent lifetimes debating troop deployments and trade sanctions now faced a calculus no algorithm could solve: how to surrender to an enemy that wouldn't even gloat. The vote, when it came, wasn't unanimous. The old warlords snarled, invoking honor, vengeance, the sacred right of the strong to rule, but the younger officers, the ones who'd seen human medics treat imperial wounded alongside their own, who'd watched human engineers rebuild bombed-out hospitals before barracks merely stood. Not in protest, in relief, the Emperor didn't join them. He stared at the empty space where the datapad had fallen, watching the numbers fade from the air. Somewhere in the night, a human somewhere was probably already archiving them, not as a trophy, but as a lesson, and that, more than any battle, was what chilled his blood. They hadn't just beaten the Empire, they'd taught it defeat. The announcement reverberated across the galaxy with the weight of a collapsing star. The High Chancellor's holographic decree shimmered above every imperial outpost, every neutral trading hub, every human-held world, its words crisp, clinical, and utterly damning. By order of the Eternal Throne, all military engagements with human forces are hereby classified as forbidden acts of strategic irrationality. The phrasing was deliberate. Not too costly, not unfavorable, irrational, as if fighting humans wasn't just a losing battle, but a cosmic slip into madness. On Earth's lunar embassy, a human diplomat, lean, scarred, and nursing a whiskey older than the Peace Accords, watched the broadcast with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Took you long enough," he muttered to the empty room, raising his glass to the flickering image of the Chancellor. The irony was thicker than the glass in his hand. The Empire hadn't surrendered, they'd retired, like a gambler walking away from a rigged table, too proud to admit they'd been outplayed. Back on the Imperial homeworld, the fallout was anything but dignified. Veterans in battle-worn armor limped through streets once lined with cheering crowds, only to be met with turned backs and hissed insults. A decorated commander, his carapace still streaked with plasma burns from Vega Prime, found his medals tossed into a gutter by his own brood mates. "You let hairless apes break you," a youngling spat, her voice trembling with betrayal. The commander didn't argue. What could he say? That humans fought like the void itself had taught them tactics. That they'd turned every imperial strength into a liability. The truth was worse than any excuse. The Empire hadn't just been beaten, they'd been outclassed. Meanwhile, in human space, the celebrations were unsettling. Bars overflowed not with triumphant cheers, but dark, jagged laughter. Soldiers swapped stories over synth beer, their toasts laced with a bitterness only survivors understood. "Here's to being too scary to fight," one crowed, sloshing his drink. Another, missing an arm and half his face from a bioweapon attack, grinned, "Nah. Here's to being too annoying to lose to." The room erupted. In a dim corner, a child barely tall enough to see over the table tugged at a veteran's sleeve. "Why are they afraid of us?" she asked, her voice small against the raucous noise. The veteran sighed, staring into his drink like it held answers. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to the child, but to the ghosts crowding the room. "Because we're monsters who never stop." The laughter died just long enough for the words to settle. Then someone started singing, off-key, loud. The rest joined in, because what else do you do when the galaxy decides you're the boogeyman? And in the Empire's shining halls, the silence was deafening. Statues of conquerors gazed down at empty corridors where petitioners once groveled. The throne itself, a monument to invincibility, now felt like a relic in a museum. The High Chancellor's final address had been scrubbed from the archives, not out of shame, but fear that future generations might hear the tremor in his voice and understand the magnitude of their mistake. The war was over. The lesson, however, was just beginning. The files weren't supposed to exist, buried beneath 27 layers of quantum encryption, stamped with warnings that turned the air cold. They flickered to life on a terminal in some forgotten corner of the Imperial Intelligence Hub. The analyst who found them, a low-level functionary who'd spent cycles cataloging rebel transmissions, froze as the first page loaded. Omega-level threat assessment, Terran Homo sapiens. The date stamp alone sent a shiver down his spine. It predated first contact by decades. What followed wasn't just a report, it was a confession, scattered across thousands of entries, written in the clipped, clinical tones of Imperial science teams, was a truth so explosive it could have shattered the Empire's foundation. They'd known. From the very beginning, they'd known. Expedition logs from long-lost scout probes described human wars not as primitive squabbles, but as fractal patterns of escalation, each conflict birthing deadlier tactics, swifter adaptations. A footnote in a xenobiology dossier circled a single, chilling conclusion. Subject species demonstrates evolutionary response to existential threats at a rate exceeding all known parameters. Hypothesized survival threshold, functionally infinite. The most damning entry came from a Black Ops surveillance team embedded on pre-war Earth. Their final transmission, hours before being captured, contained no pleas for extraction. Just a whisper, recommend avoidance at all costs. They don't just endure extinction scenarios, they collect them. When the files leaked, no one knows how. The fallout was instant. Conspiracy theorists erupted. Had the Empire provoked humanity knowing they couldn't win? Was the entire war some twisted experiment to test their own limits? A dissident journalist, broadcasting from a smuggler's den in the neutral zones, put it bluntly, they didn't ban fighting humans because we were strong. They banned it because we broke their math. In the halls of power, panic festered. The science director who'd overseen the Omega classification vanished overnight, her quarters scrubbed cleaner than a crime scene. The Council's official response was a masterpiece of bureaucratic gaslighting, archival irregularities, and unauthorized theoretical exercises. No one bought it. Because the truth was etched in the wreckage of 1,000 battles, in the hollow stares of soldiers who'd faced humans and lived, the Empire hadn't just underestimated humanity. They'd calculated them and found the equations came up short, and somewhere in the dark, a spy who'd spent years deep undercover on Earth smiled as the galaxy burned. His last message, sent via dead drop to resistance cells, was just 5 words, told you they knew. The transmission from Earth came through on all channels, unencrypted and deliberate, its tone dancing between diplomacy and something far more dangerous: amusement. The alien delegation had expected groveling, or at least tense negotiations. Instead, Earth's coalition of leaders leaned back in their chairs like they were discussing a chess move rather than galactic surrender. "Let's skip the formalities," the human representative said, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want to fight us, we'd rather not fight you. So how about this?" He slid a datapad across the table. The terms glowed softly: open trade routes, shared research initiatives, mutual defense against third-party aggressors. At the bottom, in bold, a single line: no victors, no vanquished, just profit. Silence hung over the Imperial command ship like a held breath. The High Chancellor's advisors shifted uncomfortably. They'd prepared for demands, for reparations, for the humiliating spectacle of defeat. This was worse. Humanity wasn't just offering peace, they were offering business. A grizzled human general, his uniform sleeve pinned where an arm used to be, let out a bark of laughter at their hesitation. "Relax, we don't hold grudges." "Well," he amended, tapping his temple, we do, we just monetize them." The aliens had no rebuttal. Every instinct screamed that this was a trick, that humans would weaponize trade like they'd weaponized everything else. But the math was undeniable. Their economy was in shambles. Their people were starving. Their once loyal vassals eyed them like creditors waiting to foreclose. The Chancellor's fingers twitched toward the acceptance seal. Across the table, the human diplomat smirked. "Smart choice, wars end, markets," he shrugged. They're forever back on Earth. The reactions were mixed. Stock markets soared. Veterans clinked glasses in dingy bars, toasting peace with benefits. But in the shadows, intelligence analysts exchanged wary glances. They knew the truth. This wasn't mercy. It was a longer game, because humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its ships or its soldiers. It was the terrifying, inexorable power of a species that could turn even surrender into an opportunity. The aliens had banned fighting humans. Now they'd have to survive doing business with them. And somewhere in the void between stars, a smuggler's freighter, its hull patched with scavenged imperial plating, activated its new transponder codes freshly purchased, perfectly legal. The captain hummed as the navigational AI chirped, "Route cleared for Sol's system. Welcome to the new galactic economy." The first delegation arrived unannounced, a ragged convoy of ships from the Ilthari Concord, their hulls still scorched from imperial reprisals. Their ambassador, a whip-thin serpentine diplomat with acid burns across her scales, didn't beg for sanctuary. She offered a trade. "We have star charts," she hissed, pressing a data crystal into the human envoy's palm. "Every hidden route, every imperial weak point. In return, you let our children sleep without sirens." The crystal weighed nothing. The choice it represented cracked the galaxy in half. Within cycles, the floodgates opened. The Zerathi miners, their exoskeletons cracked from generations of forced labor, docked at Mars with holds full of stolen imperial hypercores. The gas giant nomads of Tekara, once hunted for sport by imperial nobles, transmitted their entire cloaking tech archives in exchange for a single promise: make them afraid to touch us. Even the Vorath proud, reclusive engineers who'd never bowed to anyone sent a single emissary with a prototype engine that could outrun light itself. His explanation was a shrug. "You break things that shouldn't break, we respect that." On the imperial fringe, the collapse was visceral. Governors awoke to find their flags torn down by their own guards. Trading hubs once dripping with imperial insignia now fluttered human-approved neutrality badges. A Threxian warlord, infamous for glassing rebellious moons, was found barricaded in his vault, screaming at holograms of his own defecting lieutenants. "Traitors, all of you," the holograms didn't answer. They just kept replaying the same leaked footage, human medics treating Threxian younglings in a bombed-out hospital, their claws gentle around tiny, trembling hands. The scholars' treatise, scrawled on smuggled paper and circulated through black markets, put words to the quiet revolution. They built no throne, they demanded no oaths. Yet here we are, weaving their symbols into our armor, teaching their language to our young, not because they forced us, because we saw what they were, and it terrified us more than their weapons. A people who fight not for dominion, but for the sheer audacity to exist unbroken. On Earth, the response was characteristically chaotic. A Martian dockworker, elbow deep in Zerathi engine grease, grinned when asked why humanity was accepting former enemies so easily. "Ever seen a stray dog bite the hand that feeds it?" he said, tossing a wrench to a Ilthari engineer. "Nah, you feed it, it barks for you, same principle." Behind him, a Vorath mechanic snorted a sound humans had learned meant laughter. The Empire's last broadcast, before the comms went dark, was a single line from a broken chancellor: "You gave them choices." That was the mistake, and somewhere in the void, a child on a repurposed imperial warship now renamed Hope's stain in jagged human script pressed her forehead to the observation glass, watching Earth grow larger in the viewscreen. Her mother's claws rested on her shoulders, not in fear but anticipation. "What are they?" the child whispered. The answer came not from her mother, but from the human pilot humming off-key in the cockpit, annoyingly hospitable. "Welcome to the neighborhood." The High Chancellor's claws tremble as the hologram of Earth rotates between them, its blue-green glow casting shadows across the war room's hollowed-out silence. His whisper isn't meant for the advisors, the generals, or even the ghosts of the dead crowding the chamber. It's a confession, pulled from some gut-deep place where fear curdles into awe. What are they capable of if war was just a game to them? The words hang, sharp as a blade balanced on its edge, because that's the real horror, isn't it? The Empire threw fleets, bioweapons, even planet crackers at humanity, and Earth's children treated it all like a puzzle, not a fight for survival, but a grim, grinning challenge to be solved. They didn't just endure the Empire's worst, they reverse-engineered it, turned occupation into opportunity, terror into trade, despair into a damn cottage industry. Every defeat they shrugged off became a lesson. Every atrocity they survived, just more data to weaponize. The hologram flickers, zooming in on a cluster of lights along Earth's eastern seaboard cities that were glass craters 6 months ago, now pulsing with defiant reconstruction. The Chancellor's mandibles click, a sound like bones breaking. He remembers the reports, human engineers jury-rigging imperial shield tech into farming equipment. Their medics synthesizing bioweapon strains into vaccines. Even their artists scavenging wreckage to forge monuments, turning war trophies into tourist attractions. And the ban, it wasn't mercy, it wasn't even strategy, it was the only move left when facing a species that treats annihilation like a rough draft. The screen fades to black, but the question lingers, thick as smoke. Because the Empire now understands the truth too late, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their adaptability, their resilience, or even their vicious humor. It was the terrifying, bottomless fun they found in the fight, the way they grinned from burning trenches, cracked jokes over dead starships, turned every loss into a remix. Somewhere in the dark, a human somewhere is probably laughing right now, not at the Empire's surrender, at the next game they've already started playing. And the galaxy, it's just begun to realize it's no longer the board, it's the prize.